Yes, and here's the paradox also is that the pain is necessary. Usually, and that's where people don't understand, is that usually when you see somebody in pain, you want to make them feel better. So if somebody is hurt, you want to make them, or somebody has a toothache, you give them the name of your dentist. You want them to remove the pain. And in grief, pain is essential.
No pain, no gain.
Well, yeah, basically, yeah. And also the pain's legitimate. So when you try to do away with the pain, you're trivializing the loss. And that's the most common mistake people make.
Today, we have a special episode, an episode that we've never done before. Today, we sat down with Dr. Norman Blumenthal, who is a clinical psychologist with extensive expertise in trauma, grief, and crisis intervention. He serves as the Director of Trauma, Bereavement, and Crisis Intervention at Ohel Children's Home and Family Services, where he provides critical support to individuals and families facing loss, tragedy, and emotional distress. Dr. Blumenthal has worked closely with schools, organizations, and communities offering guidance in the aftermath of traumatic events. He is a sought-after speaker and educator, frequently lecturing on topics related to resilience, mental health, and the unique challenges of grief among individuals. His work has profoundly impacted the Jewish community and beyond, helping individuals from difficult experiences with compassion and psychological insight. Our episode today is sponsored by Sarah Miriam Gross, who is an amazing author who wrote the book Invisible Tribe, where she goes a little more in depth about children who lost parents at a young age and how they overcame these different scenarios and difficulties throughout their life to achieve success in their own lives. We're going to be showing you a short clip today just about how impactful this book is and what you can really get out of Sarah Miriam Gross's book Invisible Tribe. As you can see, we have a lot to unpack today, so get ready for an extreme amount of inspiration. You are now listening to the Letter S podcast, finding success through challenges in life. Dr. Blumenthal, thank you so much for joining us today. What a privilege to have your time. I really appreciate it. How are you doing today so far?
Thank you for all the good work you're doing.
Thank you for coming and speaking on our podcast. We're very excited to hear everything you have to share and all the wisdom you have to share with us. Everything you have to
Hopefully everything. Hopefully we get to everything.
I don't want to hear everything, but okay.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? Have any children?
Sure.
What's life like these days?
These days, okay. So I actually grew up in Queens, where we are, but not this part of Queens. I grew up in Forest Hills. Born in Brooklyn, but moved to Forest Hills when I was a child. My parents, my mother is a survivor of 7 concentration camps. My father is a refugee from Germany, who actually was one of the Ritchie boys, a little-known part of American Jewish history, but the American Army took, I think it was about 200-300 mostly German Jewish refugees during World War II and took them to Camp Ritchie, which is still around, a military camp in Maryland, and trained them in interrogation, translation, espionage, and used their familiarity with Germany for the war effort. So he served 4.5 years in the American Army as one of the Ritchie boys. Pretty standard, modern, Orthodox education, YCQ, MTA, YU.
YCQ.
Yeah, right, YCQ, yes. In Jamaica still.
Wow.
When I was in Jamaica. There have been times where, for crisis calls, I've had to go to the current YCQ, and I mentioned to the kids that I'm a graduate from Jamaica. They look at me like I'm a dinosaur. It's like, wow. That actually, again, I'm a very Queens-bound person, even though I live currently in the Five Towns. Went to graduate school in Adelphi, interned at Hillside Hospital, now it's Zucker Hillside Hospital, then part of Long Island Jewish, now it's called Northwell. I was there for about 42 years in different capacities. Left there a few years ago. Currently, I run the trauma team for Ohel. We have about 20 licensed mental health professionals, mostly here in the tri-state area in South Florida. We've trained in bereavement and crisis intervention, and this is the kind of work that we do. Interventions, weekends, we do a number of retreats. We have not done retreats for parents who lost, for early parental loss, because Lynx does their retreats. We try to do retreats that nobody else is doing, so we've done a few retreats, one for parents who've lost adult children, which is an interesting dynamic, touches upon this because there's often grandchildren involved. We've done a retreat for sibling loss, which nobody else has done. We're currently, in about 2 months, we're going to be doing a retreat for parents who've lost children who struggled. Children who lost children to suicide and overdose. So we're trying to find niches that other people are not addressing. I also teach at YU, mostly in the smicha program. I teach a course, Pastoral Psychology, which is a survey course going through numerous psychological issues that future rabbis need to know. I'm also teaching the Reitz Furkauf program. It's a select program for the smicha students. I teach the bereavement course. And I co-teach a course on contemporary issues, and I give a class also on death notification. So that pretty much, and a private practice.
Okay, so you do everything.
Yeah, basically.
Occasionally I sleep. Once in a while I get reacquainted with my family, but yeah, thank God I'm still very busy.
Wow, that's incredible. And we'll touch on it a little bit more later, but these retreats sound very fascinating, very interesting what the programming would be like.
Amazing, yeah.
But before all that, I'm wondering why you decided to go into such a specific work,
Well,
going
I
into
didn't.
bereavement.
I didn't. It was the last thing in the world I thought I'd do when I was in graduate school. I was going to be a child analyst. Now, I did do my dissertation on children of Holocaust survivors. It was one of the first. So I guess in an oblique way, I was heading in that direction, but it wasn't an interest of mine. What happened was I was about 10, 15 years in the field. Things were pretty good. I was building up a practice
In the psychologist field.
in psychology. I was building up a practice. This is like the mid-90s. Building up a practice. I was still affiliated with Hillside. I was doing supervision, training, etc. I think it might have been the very tail end. For a while, I was a psychologist at Ohel, People Academy in Long Beach. It might have been a very tail end of that. But I got a call from a social worker from Lifeline, Cindy Cabot, and she tells me that when she asked to meet me in my office, and she comes to my office, and she tells me that they lost 6 children that year, and they want to do a weekend for the parents of those 6 children, and would I be the psychologist? At first, I was very flattered that they asked me. I later found out I was the 7th psychologist they asked. Nobody wanted to go near the subject. And then they finally said, well, who says no to nothing? And they came up with my name. But they connected it to my work with Holocaust survivors and their children. And I really wasn't, it was scary. I wasn't looking for anything. But I don't like to say no. I said, I'll think about it. And so she left. And I was sitting in my office, and I was thinking about it, and I said to myself, you know, if you're a mountain climber, you want to do Everest. This is Everest. So I did it. It was very successful. Fast forward to now. Now I run the team here at the team for Ohel, where we do this kind of work.
What was that like the first time that you went into that specific category with High Lifeline?
When I ran that weekend, frightening, scary, and I shudder at the thought of how little I knew. It was, I learned, the Talmud talks about Rabbi Hanina, who says that he learned a lot from his teachers and more from his peers, but learned the most from his students. I can say the same thing is true as a mental health professional. I had great professors, very interesting. I have terrific colleagues, but I've learned the most. My patients have trained me, and here too, they've trained me.
When do you think the switch in your mind was that you wanted to go into what you do now instead of what you were doing? Well, do you feel like I feel like, do you enjoy what you do?
It's very fulfilling.
So when did you seek out more opportunities to go into that?
I didn't. This is what's, I think it's a very good lesson in life. The opportunities sought me. Mm-hmm. I wasn't looking for this, but it just caught on. And I got a name, and then more people came, and more opportunities. And so I wasn't looking for this.
So just to be clear, nothing in your earlier life, childhood, a little bit after that, really triggered something that
I could
pushed
say
towards
no.
that.
I could say that certainly aspects of my childhood did, and probably most poignantly the being the child of a Holocaust survivor. One of the example we're going to be talking about early parental loss. One of the aspects of early parental loss is that the parent is present and absent at the same time. It's a kind of strange, paradoxical experience. And I can say it certainly was part of my childhood. There was a whole family and a whole community and a whole world, or worlds, if I include my father. My father didn't go through the Holocaust, but he also fled Germany. There were worlds out there and people who were very important to me, whom were present and absent, and most notably my grandfather, I'm named after, who was murdered in Auschwitz, who was a very saintly man and learned man, and his presence and absence was profoundly felt. So I think that, and that's an aspect of all grief. So I think that had it, but that, that's Monday morning quarterbacking. I can look back and say, oh yeah, that makes sense, and that's perhaps why it was a good fit. But if you're going to ask me that I had some sort of childhood experience that I have to go into grief and trauma, nothing could be further from the truth.
Right. That's so interesting.
Yeah, well, I think it's a lesson in life. It's fine. For many years, I ran groups for psychiatry residents and psychology interns at Hillside, and while they're in training, and they say, "I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that," and inside I was laughing. You have no idea what you're going to do. Life's going to take you, or if you want to look at it religiously, Hashem's going to take you where you're supposed to be. It doesn't always work out. Man plans, God laughs. So,
Yep.
you don't know where you land up. And I think it's a very good lesson in life in general.
What do you you mentioned grief and trauma. What do you think are some differences and similarities between grief and trauma?
Well, actually, to some extent, they're antagonistic. It's an interesting thing where I've come to learn that grief and trauma are not good bedfellows. In a typical loss, I'm not talking about a 99-year-old great-great-grandfather, who's had a very full life. I'm talking about the kind of losses that we have to deal with at the Ohel trauma team. The initial response is more trauma than grief, especially some of these more horrific residential fires, vehicular accidents, suicide, murder, these kind of things, of course, but more so. But even if it's a death from some prolonged illness or something like that, I was by my mother's side when her monitor went flat. I mean, she was 91, almost 92, and was a great grandmother at the time. But still, that being there when the person transitions from this world to the next is a very traumatic experience. So the early reaction is trauma. The trauma is very intense and short-lived. From the funeral on, the grief takes over for the trauma. But sometimes when there's a highly traumatic death, the trauma sort of blocks or eclipses the grief. So a call we'll get is, Dr. Blumenthal, I love my son. I haven't been able to grieve. I haven't been able to cry. And very often what's behind that is that the trauma of the child's death is still dominating their psyche, and the trauma has to be, resolved before they can allow the grief to come in. So they're not, as I said, they're not good bedfellows.
That's interesting. Can you talk about some experiences that you've had either with Ohel or other things that you've done in your life, and talk about going through those and how you approach them?
So many.
Pick like 3 maybe, whatever you want.
Start with one.
Okay, 1.
Experiences that I've had that I'll try to give some that are representative. Well, I'll give you a common experience. We want to focus on early parental loss, I assume, right?
Yeah.
Yes, or any loss in general
Or
works too.
loss in general. So I'll tell you, it's not a one experience, but it's a fairly common experience I get, and I think it speaks to a child's reaction to early parental loss. Not uncommonly, after a young parent dies, I will get a call from the widow. Let's say it's a father. I'll get a call from the widow that for an appointment for her 9-year-old oldest son. And they'll come to the office. She'll be sitting there, and you can tell she hasn't slept in 3 weeks. She's been crying herself to sleep. She looks awful. Black, lines under her eyes. Sort of disheveled, so like a fixated frown on her face. And the kid is standing off in the corner. He won't even sit down with his arms folded, and his body language basically saying, "I'd rather have a root canal without anesthesia than talk to you." So usually what I've come to do is I'll tell the mother, go to the waiting room, which is, I know, even my practice in general, and parents being children, that's their favorite time, because the only time they're all alone, they have no other kids, and I sit down with the kid and I tell him, you don't have to say a word. I'm going to do all the talking. And I talked to him about grief, and I talked to him with full assurances that he's going to be normal and he's going to have everything in life that life has to offer, you know, and I give him a speech, and I tell him he doesn't have to come back, he's fine. And then I call the mother, and I tell her, don't worry about him, he's all right. If he ever wants to come, the door's always open, but let him be. And what's so interesting about that is, not always, but not uncommonly, 2 years later, or something like that, the kid will say, you remember that weird guy you took me to after Daddy died? You know, I'll talk to him just once. I'll talk to him one more time. You know, this thing that people push therapy after grief. I mean, we can talk about that some more. Therapy is not always indicated after grief. That's a fairly common experience. Another experience, and this is not one that, but I think it's very representative, that I've heard from several people, but I'll mention one of them. One example that comes to mind is a man who lost a 2-year-old toddler right in front of his house, pedestrian accident, one of these really awful stories. And he told me what was one of the most comforting Shiva visits. He said, a man with a lot of life experience, that's why he put it, fill in the gaps, came to the Shiva house, worked his way up to the front, asked to see a picture of his daughter, of Leah, Zichrono Livracha. He gave her a picture. He looked at the picture. He cried for 10 minutes straight. He handed the picture back. He said the hamakom, and he left. He said that was the most comforting visit. Somebody else told me a similar story about his chavrusa from yeshiva, when he also lost a child. I mean, the person who told me the story. He drove from Baltimore to New York, walked in, sat down, cried, got up, said the hamakom, and left. He said he drove 8 hours for a 10-minute cry. That was the most comforting visit. Another story that comes to mind, actually, I guess it's sort of random. I was once running a group for parents who lost children, and one father described bringing this was also a very young child, a 2-year-old child, home after the doctors told him that there's nothing else to do. And he described to the group how he went into the backyard and he sat in the swing and just swinged, holding this child. And the whole group was silent. It felt like an eternity. It was probably 5 minutes. But it was really a profound experience, because it's like, what do you say? You know, there are no words. That's enough.
It sounds like these small things make a huge impact.
Yes.
Bigger than any big thing that they would do.
Yes. You know, when you're there, this is what I've learned from the team. It's the enormity of the responsibility. You know, when I teach the course on death notification, in other words, this means we have to go and notify someone usually of an unexpected death. And someone once told me that there was one of these cop shows, which I've written, Law and Order, one of those types of shows, where a senior police officer was going with a junior officer to someone's house to notify them about the death of a loved one. And he said, get ready to be the main character in the worst day of somebody's life. When you're the main character in the worst day of somebody's life, when you do it right, they love you forever. When you do it wrong, they hate you forever. You're whatever you do, and every facial expression, every nuance is being judged and being embedded in their memory. So it is a tremendous responsibility. It's a tremendous honor. And that's why it's important when I train the rabbinic students. And these, because the rabbi very often is the one who's
Right.
called in to do the notification. How important it is to know what you're doing. So it is, as I said, you're a key figure, and it comes with the backdrop of people do so many well-meaning but terrible things. When we have our retreats, one of the obvious main topic is the loss. The second main topic is all the well-meaning but stupid things people do. I often say if our yeshivas would spend as much time teaching our children how to conduct themselves beinadam l'chavera, between people, as they do beinadam l'makom, between them and God, we'd be a lot better off.
Right.
But people mean well. They just don't know.
So interesting. I feel like I'm going back to something you said a while ago, but you were speaking about the scenario with the boy and you said to him, you're going to be normal. Do you think that that's a kid's biggest, like when they lose a parent, do you think their biggest thought is, I'm never going to be normal? You think that's the
Well,
biggest?
I don't think it's a thought, it's a crusade, especially for elementary school age children. The elementary school age child does not want to be different. They want to be part of the bigger group. Teenagers don't mind being different. They'll have green hair or whatever, but the elementary school age child just wants to fit in. He doesn't want the spotlight on him. In fact, again, since you like stories, I one time, I'm not going to say who it is because this is a public kind of thing, but there was a death of a child. It was actually in another country. I was flown in, and I was meeting with the teachers and the parents, and this was a 9-year-old kid. And the teachers said to me, they weren't English speaking, so I was surprised they knew this word. They said, he has a nemesis. Maybe it's in that language, there's a comparable word, which means like an enemy. It's a kid he's fighting with him all the time. And they said, so we're going to tell him to stop fighting with him. I said, don't you dare. He's going to come back to school, and this kid who's always fighting with him is nice to him. He's going to know it's pity. He doesn't want to be pitied. You tell the kid as soon as he comes back, punch him in the nose and start the fight all over again. Because that's what they want. They want to be normal. They don't want to stick out. So in fact, it's one of the most interesting things I heard in my course on bereavement. And for the smicha students, what I do is I have 1 week lecture, and then 1 week I bring in someone who had a loss. So they get the experiential with the information. And for early parental loss, I bring in 2 people, my wife who lost her mother at 16, and one of the rabbis from the smicha program who was around my age, who lost his father when he was 6. And this rabbi, his mother's still alive. So when the yahrzeit comes for his father, which was some 60 years ago that he died, so he, as we say, takes the helmet. He leaves the services. He says it's nothing out of the ordinary for someone my age to observe a yahrzeit. Most of us have lost parents already. But he says, but every time he's up there, he thinks people are staring at him saying, what's this little kid doing leading the services? And he's in his upper 60s. But that's how much ingrained it is that they don't want to be different. They want to blend in. They want to be like everybody else. So I'm not going to say and they go out of their way. If I visit a kid who lost a parent during the Shiva, and if I say to the kid, again, elementary school I'm talking about now, let's say 6 to about 11, and I say to him, I'm going to your school tomorrow to talk to your classmates. What do you want me to tell them? I can almost predict. I say, treat me normally. Don't treat me any different. Don't treat me like I'm weird. And they feel very strongly about that.
No, I definitely agree with that. Anytime I think I go out with friends at any age, I want to be treated, the same.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel like, the pity part.
Right.
But
Yeah.
really part of everybody else, or else I kind of feel worse about myself.
I'm saying you feel
I feel worse about myself.
about yourself. When you do that, or in general.
When my friends would, kind of single me out. Like
Okay.
I'm not being a part of them, or
Right.
something were to come up and
Well, there are
they
ways
look
to
at
do
me
it.
and
There are ways to do it. I mean, again, depending on the friend. One of the things I say to kids when I go to schools after the death, let's say it's a kid loses a parent. So, the hardest thing for the kids is what do we do when he comes back? Because everything else is scripted. Shiva, funerals, they're all kind of scripted. But this, and one of the, I tell him, treat him normally. Whatever, he's on your team, he's still on your team. If you tease him a lot, continue to tease him. But one of the things I tell them is that your interaction with the child should be commensurate. I don't use that word, but should be commensurate with the relationship that existed previously. So don't feign more friendship that exists because you feel bad for the kid. But a close friend can say something, I think, as long as it's said with dignity. Pity is, I'm up here, you're down here. It's like this. I have actually a friend and colleague who lost his wife very suddenly, also a pedestrian accident. And he said something that was brilliant but subtle. He said that during Shiva, several people said to him when they're getting up, Hashem should give you strength. He didn't like that. He said one friend got up and said, Hashem will give you strength. And that he liked. And if you think about it, Hashem should, you poor thing. Hashem will, okay. It's like said with dignity. And that's tolerable. Again, I can't speak for your own experience, but that's what I see from the people that I speak to.
I was speaking to a friend recently. It was recently my dad's birthday, and I was feeling really sad. and I found a bunch of videos of him that I was watching, which was not a good call because then I had a bunch of dreams. Like, it was just not a good call. But anyway, I was speaking to a friend because there's a song that my dad really liked. And after he died, the school, I was in second grade, and the school learned it. And I asked my friend, I was like, what was that experience for you? Because I've known her my whole life. And I was like, what was it like finding out that one of your friends' fathers passed away? What was it like in school? It reminded me of that because you said, what are the kids going to act like when the person who lost that parent comes back? And I think, obviously, the younger it is, the more complicated it is. And I think it's just a really interesting point. And also, obviously, once you got into not wanting to feel different, obviously, I also feel that. So thank you for explaining that more. And you obviously hear a lot of different things, and you hear very tough things. Your work is very intense. Are there ways that you have a way to, I don't want to say decompress, but it's a lot to hold on to? What are ways that you deal with that?
I think that's the most common question I get asked. And it's interesting you mentioned about dreams. My how should I put it, symptom that I know I'm in it, I need a break is when I start dreaming about my work. That's usually an indication to me that I have to pull back. And my answer to that question is, first of all, we do debrief. There's a requirement on our team that if somebody goes to an intervention, especially some of these more difficult ones, somebody does a death notification, goes to a school after a suicide, these kind, but especially some of these more trying ones, they must meet with either me or my counterpart, civi writer, to process it. Because if you don't, it catches up with you, and it blindsides you. Because the effects are cumulative. It's not one big event, it's the 15th. So it all chips away, and that 15th one can send you over the edge. So because then usually what happens, I'll call and say, no, I'm fine, you don't have to be, I'm okay. And I say, no, you gotta Zoom or meet with me and process it because it catches up with you. So one way is obviously processing. It's interesting, though, at this point, and I'm doing this work over 30 years, my fear is not even so much that it'll be too much, but I'm afraid of becoming callous. I tell my wife all the time, if I get a call for a tragedy and I just go willingly with no hesitation, I have to retire. I must be upset. I must be. But the other thing is and I think that's important, there's a whole, that could be a whole podcast unto itself, but there's a whole area called vicarious trauma, which is what we're talking about, or secondary trauma, which is that you get traumatized by helping people with trauma. But there's also a less known area of study called vicarious resilience, which is that by watching people cope, watching what you guys did with your tragedy, seeing how brilliantly people cope it just reinforces your sense of the strength and talent and resilience that people have. So it's a very mixed bag. I see terrible tragedy, pain, and hurt, but I also see incredible strength. But I'll tell you one more thing. I once shared this at a convention, and people were very moved by it, so I'll share it with you now. There's a certain point in the Yom Kippur davening which I look forward to, and that's the Nasana Tokef.
I knew you were going to say that. I don't know why.
Yeah. And when during the Nasana, and usually the Chazan goes to town on that, so you have some time. And I bury myself in my talus, and a year's worth of children who died, young people who died, tragedies, overdoses, so they're like walking in front of me. And I have a very cathartic cry. And it carries me through the year. It's like that's my time to get it out. Because people must think I have a horrible life because I'm buried in a talus crying my eyes out, But it is a way for me to, and I look forward to it. It's a strange thing to say, but it's something I need to manage the work that I do.
Do you, and if yes, how do you bring Judaism into what you do? Because I know that for some kids, it might be comforting to hear, oh, Hashem has a plan, and it's all going to be okay. And then for others, it will be like it won't be helpful, and they'll actually want to rebel against Judaism and say, oh, I'm mad at God. So how do you bring religion into it, and how?
And actually, with that question, just additionally, does Ohel provide do you have to have any structure with anything with that? Because I know Ohel is a Jewish organization.
Okay, I'll get that
So
in a minute.
is there?
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
So actually, the question is the opposite, which is how do I withhold the Jewish, especially if I'm dealing with, I've dealt with Gentiles and with unaffiliated Jews. In fact, it's funny, the program that I teach in, the YU program, which is a special program, it's a partnership between REITs and FERCAF. FERCAF is a graduate school in psychology, to train the rabbinic students. And they get they got a state accredited approval about 2 years ago to get a degree in like a certificate in pastoral counseling. So the dean of FERCAF, we had a what's it called, a collective call, with the professors in the program and the representative from REITs, and FERCAF, and the dean of FERCAF was saying she'd like to expand it and open it up to imams and priests as well. So the head of the program from the REITs end was kibitzing with me and said, Norman, you're going to have to stop using all your Yiddishisms. I said, I think it would be easier to teach the imams and the priests Yiddish than to get me to stop using my Yiddishisms. It's so much a part of the work that it's, I don't try to differentiate it. Now, I would have to say the bulk of my work is within the observant Jewish community, anywhere from Hasidish. I've trained teams in New Square and in Williamsburg, in Lakewood. So we have, that they consult. Now my role with them is more tertiary. They have their own trauma teams that we've trained, which is where you should be, because when you come into a crisis, you don't have time to overcome cultural barriers, and
Right.
so you need someone. You need someone familiar. After the Jersey City shooting in the Satmar community. I didn't go myself, but I oversaw what was happening, and we sent members of the Hasidic community to the school. Actually, there was one who was actually holed up in the school while the shooting was going on, and in constant phone contact with us. So that's very important. But in terms of there's several things about Jewish tradition that's so important. One is the concept of, and I'm going to purposely use the English, the soul, the hereafter, and the resurrection of the dead, the neshama, Gan Eden, and Tchias HaMesim. And the research, actually, psychological research shows that people who have these beliefs fare better with grief than those who
Right.
don't. So if I am dealing with someone who's not from the Orthodox Jewish community, or as I said, I've had non-Jews come to me. I once had an Iraq widow come to see me. One of my first questions, which would not be a question in my regular practice, which is, what's your belief system? It's important for me to know. I haven't met an agnostic yet. I've heard some very interesting theories, but I haven't met an agnostic yet. So certainly those concepts, and the idea that in some way or another the person is still present, the person still exists. The Jewish tradition, it used to be just a Hasidic thing, and I think other people have adopted it, to drop off invitations at the cemetery. If you go now to a cemetery, you see permits for wedding invitations all over the place. I always say the problem is when they get an RSVP. That's when I get nervous. But this is a very healthy way to grieve. And also, not that the rabbis need to endorse my endorsement, but Shiva is beyond brilliant.
Yeah.
Shiva is remarkable. A theme I often try to develop with the people I'm helping is that when someone dies, the relationship doesn't end, it changes. Changes from a face-to-face relationship to a relationship of memories and legacies. And if you do Shiva right, which not everybody does, but if you do Shiva right, and you really talk about the person and recall the person, you're launching this process, which is a lifelong process, which is an internalization of the I once heard something brilliant. I was at a eulogy for a child who died, unfortunately, in a fire. And the rabbi said, we have a tradition in Shiva to cover the mirrors. And you wonder, well, I always thought it was so you don't adorn yourself, which may be the main reason. But what he said was that a mirror shows someone who's here now. The goal in Shiva is to see someone who's not here now. So we cover the mirrors. So this is all very, a lot of it is similar in other practices. I know the wake is also, I guess, like that. So other practices and traditions have that, but they probably stole them from us. Pardon my chauvinism, but we've been around for a while. So I think it's the process of naming someone else after that person, so that that person in that way lives on. even the Kaddish and the yard site and all of these opportunities to remember and honor the person are priceless in terms of coping and Shiva.
So most of the guests that we've had on here
Yeah.
have said that they love the Shiva process. It's amazing what we do.
Mhm.
But we've had a couple that have mentioned that they really dislike it and that it's just like, I don't need it. And why are we having this? Just let me continue my life. So what would you say to someone like that?
They're probably not, I mean, unfortunately, people don't do Shiva right. Usually what they do is they either just an opportunity to socialize or they try to make the person feel better, which is the worst thing to do. Shiva, when I go pay Shivas, most of Shiva visits I pay now are for my contemporaries or losing elderly parents. And I walk in and there's a lot of banter and stuff like that. I'll go up to the person and just say, tell me a story about your father. Stories are great because stories in a few words capture the person. Or I'll say, where's your mother? Where was your mother born? Where did was she born in this country? What did she do? Where did she go? And people love it. I think when I remember I was very fortunate. I didn't sit Shiva till I was in my 60s. My parents did have longevity. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, I know the benefit. I could, tell stories about my parents and things, but I could do it on the computer. I could just, I didn't think. But then I realized that the audience's role is very important because when when you live with something, you take it for granted. You acclimate to it. That's in psychology called acclimate. In the Talmud they call it nasika heter. You get used to something, so you don't appreciate the enormity of it. When you see the reaction of the people who are sitting there, then you understand. It taught me about my parents. I just give an example. My mother came from a Hasidic background, and of course her family was almost completely killed off. And my father was a German Jew, very different culture. And usually in a family, you hold by the husband's or father's traditions. And my father reshaped the whole way in which he conducts, especially the Shabbos table, the Sabbath table, to be much more like my mother's way. The songs we sang at the table were all Eastern European Hasidic, because she lost everything. And so he even changed the way he said Kiddush. So it'd be more like the way it was in her house, because she, to preserve it for her sake. I thought everybody does that. That was nothing out of the ordinary, I remember when I told people that during Shiva, they were blown away. So I learned about my father. But again, you have to do it right. If you do it right, if you don't, if you come in and you talk about the Mets, it's frustrating. Or if you try to make the person feel better, oh, he's in a better place, and that's harmful, not helpful. Even though it's meant well, it's harmful.
Right, because most people, all they want to do talk about is themselves or their loved ones, especially ones that they lost.
Yes, and here's the paradox also, is that the pain is necessary. Usually, and that's where people don't understand, is that usually when you see somebody in pain, you want to make them feel better. So if somebody is hurt, you want to make them, or somebody has a toothache, you give them the name of your dentist, you want them to remove the pain. And in grief, pain is essential.
No pain, no gain.
Well, yeah, basically, yeah. And also the pain's legitimate. So when you try to do away with the pain, you're trivializing the loss. And that's the most common mistake people make with things they say. But if you validate, you cry with the person, like those examples I gave earlier, then you're validating their pain.
Right.
And that's how, just in terms of Ohel serves predominantly the Jewish community. Ohel is a humongous organization. They have like 1,500 employees. They have, I think, a $98 million budget. I don't know, something crazy like that. They have many. In fact, it's a blessing and a problem, because you go on the website, you got a headache. But they have foster care, and they have housing, and they have elder care, and they have an early childhood program, a school-based program. They have many, and they have the trauma team. It's one of many. How ecumenical it has to be or not depends on the funding. So if the funding comes from the government, obviously it's non-denominational and we're servicing the entire community. If the funding is private, then sometimes the private funding says this is earmarked for the Jewish community. The trauma team was funded with an earmark towards the Jewish community.
If you're really resonating with this episode with Dr. Blumenthal, then you would for sure love to hear more about what Sarah Miriam Gross wrote in her book, Invisible Tribe. For now, here's the short clip of what she gets into about death and how to overcome and achieve success when children lose parents at a young age.
Children who've lost a parent feel sad and alone. But they're not alone. They actually belong to an invisible tribe of kids from all over who have lost their mother or father. This book connects them to that community. Invisible Tribe is a collection of 42 uplifting stories with 24 amazing illustrations. It's emotional support, coping tools, and even some laughs for orphans aged 8 to 13. And you can order Invisible Tribe for the library of your school, yeshiva, and shul, or put it in your therapy center waiting room. Put it anywhere a hurting orphan may read it and find comfort and community. And if you lost a parent, buy it for yourself to help comfort your own inner child.
How do you think we educate people about how to act in these scenarios? Because hopefully we're hoping that everyone listens to this, but that's not the case, probably.
Not yet.
Not yet. We're getting there. And people need to know how to act in a Shiva home
100%.
and around people who have lost family members. And a lot of people do, and a lot of people don't. So how do we spread awareness about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I just, our rabbi, Rabbi Yaakov Trump from the Young Cedar, has just donated a kidney. And he's,
Wow.
He's just coming, he's just recovering. With kidney donation, the one who donates it is more hampered afterwards than the one who receives it. And when we dropped off our Mishlach Manos, Purim, he was talking about his recovery. And one point, he said something about how, like, that, you have no control over your life. And I said to him, well, that's part of Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick, is you're supposed to give them agency. You're supposed to ask them, do you want to shade up, shade down? And he himself was a rabbi who does this all, and I said, wow, that's interesting. These things, I remember a number of years ago, I was out invited. I went to Chicago because there was, at that time, a girl was hit on her bicycle. I always say jokingly that this is why I don't get invited to parties, because people ask me what I do for a living. The party's over, But, and I was in my motel room, and I got a call from the principal of Hannah Sachs, which is the, like, Beis Yaakov of Chicago. And he said to me, we're always sending our girls out to do chesed. We never taught them how to do chesed. Could you give a class on how to do chesed? I thought it was so incredible. I put together a PowerPoint that night in the hotel room. How do you visit the sick? How do you comfort the bereaved? How do you give charity? These are all skills. And just like we teach someone how to blow a shofar or how to say Kriya Shema or something like that, why aren't we teaching this why isn't this part of the education? And I think that's how you do it. Whatever especially when you teach children, it stays. Now, you don't just give one lesson. You repeat it. And as it comes up, and it's the Chumash and the Talmud are replete with incredible examples of how to do this. So, there are countless opportunities, and I don't think it's really an integral part of the education.
And it should be, you're saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah, obviously.
Absolutely, it should be a curriculum.
Yeah.
It should be, and not even just stories about, very righteous people who did incredibly righteous things that none of us can replicate. But just plain, what do you do when you pay a visit? What do you do when you visit someone who's sick? What do you do if you hurt somebody's feelings? How do you apologize? How do you jokes? I'll be careful about. I was at one of my kids. I'm going on a tangent. Just tell me, but I was at one of my kids. Chumash grandkids. Chumash. I don't know. This is a new thing
Chumash
now.
play.
Yeah.
Mazel tov.
Yeah, right. Every other week, some school is inviting the grandparents, usually on the most congested day of the year. One time, one of the kids, I think on Mother's Day, it took me 3 hours to get from Passaic back to the 5 towns. It's, they're constantly inviting us. So there was one of those. And the Rebbe was a very entertaining guy, which is you have to be today. You can't just be, my days, you're really a Holocaust survivor who barely spoke English. But, nowadays they have to be like very entertaining. And he told a joke, which was about a bunch of people jumping off a bridge and killing themselves. And it bothered me. I said, there was a whole crowd of people. How do you know there's nobody here who lost a child or a parent to suicide? Would you make cancer jokes? Would you make, aneurysm jokes, So I want to say something to him. My wife has these things called social skills. I'm not sure what they are, but, she told me, come on, if you want your child to pass 3rd grade, you better keep your mouth shut, So I said, okay, so I didn't talk to him.
Did he pass 3rd grade?
I think so, yeah, by the skin of his teeth, yeah. We should know better. We should know that it's, you don't know. You don't know what,
Right, so where's the line of what jokes we can make, what we cannot? And sometimes, like, I make jokes not so intensely, but just to make maybe other people feel, other people feel comfortable around me because of my situation, that it's not like treating me differently.
If you're making jokes about the United Nations, or something like that, or, if you have a clever pun, or if you make one of these kind of universal jokes poking fun at Orthodox Jews in general. There's, in fact, humor is very important. Humor is a very important form of coping. Many of the people who've been through horrific losses used humor to cope. But I think you have to filter. I got a very important lesson in one of the classes I teach. This is called Contemporary Issues. We deal with members of the Orthodox community that could be marginalized. And one of the people we invited was a mother who has a few children with mental illness. So talk about the whole experience of mental illness. We had her, and we had someone himself who's struggling with, I'm talking about serious mental illness. Yes, sir. And she said something that changed my perspective, that of all our students. She said, we go to these bar mitzvahs, and you talk about this wonderful bar mitzvah boy, and then they give the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, it comes from the parents. I said, my husband and I have a wonderful home, and all that. Kids have mental illness, and they did fall far from the tree. And it hurts every time they do that. Now, again, what rabbi wouldn't at a bar mitzvah go on and on about how this kid's so wonderful because the parents are so wonderful?
Right.
Maybe you have to think twice, and maybe you have to scan so one of the things the students said, well, we're going to worry about everything we say. Maybe. It's not worth the pat on the back if you're going to hurt someone who's struggling already. So, I don't know how we got in this tangent, but...
no, it's okay.
Yeah,
tangents are good.
It's good.
No,
Sometimes.
Humor is important. I use humor all the time. And I've had situations where my humor backfired, where I hurt somebody. So it's a very risky place to go. You got to be really kind of confident, Yeah.
For that person who, like, as Joe said, and I also use humor a lot. In the case of that person, let's say a kid who lost a parent, is it okay for them to make, like, I'll just give you an example because I'm really proud of it. I thought it was very funny. I was with two of my friends the other night, and they were talking about one of my friend's dads, and they were like, oh, like, he's a living legend. Mm-hmm. And I was like, guys, is my dad a living legend? And they were like, because he's obviously not, and he's a legend, but yeah.
Maybe he is. Maybe he is.
Right, that's true.
He's a living legend. You have to be alive.
Yeah, that's true. That's actually a good point. But I thought it was a funny joke. But do you think that the person who went through that loss is allowed to make jokes with whatever they want?
Once I was in a group with a group of mothers who lost children, and one of them mentioned that she still has her son's prosthetic leg hanging in the closet. And she said, talk about skeletons in the closet, Yeah, people will make, let me explain to you why humor is important, besides lightening it, okay? Let's dissect humor. What makes something funny? And what makes something funny is usually the punchline. And the punchline is usually a surprise. It's irony. It's something not turning out the way you expect it to. And that's what losing a parent at whatever age you were, that you lost your father. That's what it is. That's not part of the script.
Right.
He was supposed to live on to be a grandfather, great-grandfather. Nobody, that's not what's expected. So when it's an expression of life's surprises, life's curveballs.
Right.
So it's, in a way, healing. But it has to be very careful that it's not hurtful
Yeah.
to the people there, and that's a very big responsibility. So again, it's sensitivity, which can be nurtured. I don't think it's not. Yeah, obviously, some people are born with a greater capacity for empathy than others, but everybody has one. And just like if somebody has an athletic tendency, you nurture it through practicing and training.
Right.
You can nurture and train empathy, and we don't do enough of that.
Yeah.
I think what Ohel does is amazing, and all these different, really cool, but of course, unfortunate activities and programs that they run. One that stood out to me that you mentioned, like I said before, I had to get to, was the retreats. When you said that you do these certain retreats, these programs, I'm thinking of camp or playing basketball, having a good time, hanging out with friends. I'm assuming it's not like that, but I'd love to hear what.
Well, some
kind
of it is.
experience
Some of
that
it's
is.
recreation.
There is basketball?
Yeah. Well, not basketball, but we'll get a guy to come and do portraits. We'll do. I forgot the names of all these things. You build resin, whatever. You make boards, and we do some arts and some light things. If it's over Shabbos, it's a very meaningful Shabbos. In fact, some of them we do in Camp Kaylee, which is the Ohel camp. The retreat, in fact, the first retreat we did for parents who lost adult children, we did in Camp Kaylee. That was a mistake. This is already an older crowd, and even though we have regular rooms like for staff, it's still a rustic. But so there is recreational activities. The retreats, it's interesting. I just went to a wedding of one of the people. Recently went to a wedding of one of the people in our retreat. They invited us who lost an adult child, and there was another family there who had also lost an adult child. And when I saw the parents and I wished them a mazel tov, they said, "Thank you for bringing me and these other people together." And the other person signed the ksuba.
Wow.
And they met at our retreat, but they connected. We all want to feel understood. We all want to feel validated. And many people describe these retreats as the one time where they feel normal, where they feel that people around them get it. In fact, the sibling retreat was incredible in that respect. They said many of them, these were people who lost siblings years ago but are currently adults. We didn't have kids who lost siblings. Well, that could also be valuable. And they said, it haunted us for years, and nobody ever spoke about it. They say that the two losses that we say are the disenfranchised grief. One is sibling loss, and the other one is perinatal loss. But they finally got to talk about it. And people who got it and resonated with them. Now there are people who don't go, who don't want to go, and I'm a firm believer people know what they need and what they don't need. Some people feel that hearing about other people's losses and tragedies will further demoralize them and depress them, and they're not ready. They're not ready, or they don't want to. And others say that their whole year centers around the retreat. So, everybody knows what's right for them. But these are very moving experiences. I mean, I remember one year, I think it was that year we had in Camp Kaylee, the retreat for parents who lost adult children. The waiters told us, the waiters had to come early in the morning to set up for Shabbos, that when they were walking to the dining room, there were 4 people going to their bunks because they were up all night talking. That's the kind of stuff that goes on there.
Wow. Definitely sounds like a learning experience and a lot that someone can get out of this.
And they're important for the people who need it and benefit from it. It's tremendous, and I think Links Weekend, from what I hear, is kind of hear that from the kids. It means the world to them. They're normal. They're not freaks, and they don't have to hide it, and they don't have to try to act normal. They can really, and they can, talk about their parent, the deceased parent.
You mentioned a little bit earlier about therapy and how you kind of said how it's not right for everyone. Can you expand on that?
Sure. So, I'll present it to you as I present it to my students, okay? We have a condition called depression. is characterized by sadness, crying, morosity, etc. We have a technique called psychotherapy. Psychotherapy, together with medication, has a pretty good track record with depression. We have about an 80% cure rate with depression. We have a comparable condition called grief, which looks like depression. It's sadness, morosity, crying. And yet the research shows, mostly the research from Niemeyer, who's a professor at the University of Memphis, who's studied grief a lot, shows that psychotherapy for people in grief are at best useless and may even be harmful. So with my smichas students, I take out the thumbs. Okay, here we have two conditions. One look very much alike. One therapy helps. The other therapy is useless. Lamai nafka mina, if you know what that means.
Saying good, saying good.
Huh?
Saying good.
Yeah, what's the difference between the two? I mean, you're talking to smichas students, you gotta speak their language, So, and that may be fairly obvious to you, but the answer is that in depression, the person's life is normal. His life's a bowl of cherries. Or I remember the rabbi in the neighborhood I grew up in used to say that most people say life's a bowl of cherries. By us, life is a bowl of raisins. Or raising money for the shul, raising money for the yeshiva, But your life's a bowl of cherries. And see, that's a safe joke. And and yet you're sad. So there's a disconnect between your mood and the reality of your life. So therapy is to help your mood be commensurate with the reality of your life. So it's to elevate your mood. In grief, the sadness is not only legitimate, but necessary. So a technique that's aimed to relieve someone of their sadness has no place in grief. Now, there are exceptions. Sort of like I mentioned earlier, if someone is highly traumatized, then some of the trauma techniques are necessary in order to free up the grief. Sometimes people have a pre-existing either condition or tendency. Let's say somebody has a pre-existing family history of depression, and even though if they never were depressed, it was sort of dormant, and then the grief can bring out the depression, but then you're treating depression. So it's not, so grief counseling is very different than therapy. Now the question then is, why is the pain necessary? Why did God create us that we are in pain? When someone dies, he could have created us that we just sort of just shrug it off.
Right.
So the answer for that is twofold. One is, and again, I'm showing my own bias. Some people have other theories. I think one thing is that what human emotion, or not human emotion, human sensation can capture the depth of a relationship between a child and a parent. And really the most piercing human sensation is pain. So pain captures the connection that exists. So when you try to do away with your pain, it feels like you're trying to dilute the connection between the mourner and the one who died. But the other piece is what you alluded to earlier, no pain, no gain. Grieving, there are two types of problems that I as a mental health professional have to deal with. Some of the problems I can solve. So somebody comes to you with depression. Yeah, therapy helps depression. Anxiety, we have great techniques for anxiety. Phobias, we have methods. Sometimes people come to me for situations that we can't solve. So somebody could have a chronic medical condition. I once had a patient who had a condition called ankylosing spondylitis, which don't be impressed with my medical knowledge, but if I have a patient would know what it is, but it's an arthritis of the spine. It's one, if not the most painful chronic condition. There's no cure for it. He's racked in pain 24/7. What am I going to do for him? Or I've had couples come who have incurable fertility issues. What do I do for them? Or death. I can't undo the death. So when you're dealing with problems for which there is no solution, then the method is to help the person become someone who can go on living despite that part of their life that's missing or painful. So grief is in essence a growing experience, and we grow through pain, as you indicated. No better proof than the one day in our calendar associated with growth, Yom Kippur, we do Inner Nefesh, we put ourselves in pain. So the pain is essential to grief. And again, one of the things these retreats do is we don't challenge the pain. We don't try to undo anybody's pain.
Right.
We give it a voice, we give it expression, we help people integrate the pain, not get rid of it.
Wow. That's, I think, a very important lesson that everyone can take from this. And, so many important lessons that you've given us today. And we thank you so much again for your time. What we usually like to end with is our final advice we can get from you. If there was one thing or a tip that you can share with our listeners today, what would that one be?
So it's very interesting. One of the things in an area that we do, which, we didn't get a chance to talk to them, the Ohel trauma team, is sometimes we do work what's called pre-bereavement or anticipatory grief, which is someone's, with short of a miracle going to die. And how do you prepare the person for death, or how do you prepare the family? And this is something we work with, we do. And one of the most one of the most meaningful situation that we orchestrate is a goodbye. It's very powerful, where a family will come. I don't know if you guys had a chance to do it for your parents, but that last visit, and you come and you say goodbye to the person who died. And what's very interesting about that goodbye, if the person is conscious, and if the person, which we try to do it when it's close to death, but while they still can interact, is the message they give is, you guys go on living. Don't stop living. Keep, in fact, in early widowhood, if a young widow dies, or a widower, a young widow, a young spouse dies, very often the last message is, you get married, you get remarried. Sometimes even telling them who to marry. I usually say jokingly, usually not someone as pretty as they are, but they will even, and sometimes the person actually does it, that actually marries that person. So, in fact, even in suicide notes, and only 1 out of 3 people who die of a suicide leave a note, but the notes are usually very loving and usually very encouraging. Please go on living, please don't mourn too much. So those who leave this world really want the survivors and the family members to live life to the fullest, to not to forget them, to cherish their memory, but to go on living. And I think that's part of the sort of, I as an outsider can't say that, but I think what I can communicate to those, the survivors, the family members, whatever the loss is, that those who are not here anymore want you to go on living to the utmost. And that's probably, that's an important message, and people don't dispute it. They when you point that out to them, they agree that is the wish of those who are not in this world anymore.
Wow, that's so fascinating. I would have never actually guessed that there was a pre-bereavement team and a way to do it and do that final goodbye.
Yeah.
It didn't really cross my mind as much, but that I can see how important that is.
So smart.
It's not only useful. And one of the interesting things about this work is that sometimes, usually, we're taught to address the person in the current situation. So so a kid wakes up in the middle of the night and the boogeyman had a nightmare about the boogeyman. We 30 years now he's not going to be scared of the boogeyman, but we deal with the kid now because now the boogeyman feels very real. So you're very much, but when you do bereavement work, you have to think years ahead of time. And you don't want the person to be haunted the rest of their lives. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye. Now, sometimes you can't. You can't anticipate the death, and certainly these kind of services weren't available years ago, so nobody,
Right.
My wife tells a story when she came back from Shiva, there was a teacher in her school who gave her a test, and she didn't know the answer because she was missed a week of school, and the teacher reprimanded her. The school didn't even tell the teacher that her mother died. Of course, my wife burst into tears and ran home, which is the end of all her stories. I don't know how she ever got an education. Every story she tells me, she bursts into tears and runs home. But, and then the teacher found out and came over that night to the house and apologized, But we've come a long way. This would not happen today. Even in New Square and in
Anywhere.
We deal with the class and we talk to them. We notify the teachers. So we've come a long way. And so, but for the survivors, that's a very, very meaningful experience and a very moving one. So it is, it is part of the work that we do. Yeah.
Right. It's also so interesting because arguably goodbyes are the hardest thing to do in life. So it's such a difficult task to bring upon someone too.
It is and it isn't. One of the things we tell the kids, you don't have to say anything apocalyptic, you can just say thank you, or say hi to Bubby and Zadie, I don't know, you don't have to say, and sometimes they don't have to say, just the fact that they have in their memory banks that there was that last visit, means the world to them. So, and it's, one of the things I've learned from this work is that it always looms larger when you're going there than what it turns out to be. When you're in it, it works very well, and people appreciate it. People want to be validated, and there's nothing more normal than grieving.
Right.
So goodbyes are, it's interesting. The CEO of Ohel was honored recently at the gala because he had 30 years he was running the organization, and he was interviewed on, I think it's that Nachum Siegel show, some one of these, and he said something very profound, and I think that speaks to this. He said he's never had a bad day at work. He's had hard days, but he's never had a bad day. So saying goodbye is hard. It's not bad.
So important. That pre-bereavement thing is fascinating, something I've never heard of before, and definitely a hard thing to do, but as you said, very important.
What makes, let me put it to you this way. If I have a very, let's say, ordinary session, I don't know if there is such a thing, but let's say I have a regular session with a patient, and I'm not resonating with them, or I'm not getting them to budge, that's much harder than taking a 9-year-old to say goodbye to their father and letting them have that experience that they had a chance. They didn't just that they had a chance to part and say something meaningful to them. So yes, it's obviously much more profound, but what makes something, I think, hard or easy is if you're getting somewhere, if you're helping someone move along. Not being hard. What's hard is when you're stuck.
Yeah, true.
Wow. A lot of important information and
Okay.
advice that you
Well,
gave
but
us
it's
today.
all limited to this. Don't ask me about anything else in the world because I'm a total ignoramus, It's like, but this I know. This 30 years of doing this, I know it, yeah, for sure.
Well, Dr. Blumenthal, thank you so
My
much
pleasure.
for your
Okay.
advice,
Thank you for
anything
what
you
you're doing.
offered. Your humor is great.
Okay.
Definitely take some pointers from that too. And we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining
My
us.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you so much. I learned so much.
Have you noticed what Nina and I have been wearing in our most recent episodes? Yes, you thought right. It is our the letter S customized quarter zips, as you can see. Please see the link below if you are interested in purchasing one, which I'm sure you do. They're amazing. Why wouldn't you buy one? So just check out that link and buy as many as you like in any different color you want, because you will love them. Thank you again so much for listening to another episode of the Letter S podcast, inspiring one life at a time. Please make sure to check out our Instagram at the letter S podcast _. If you have any questions or are interested in hopping on a mic with us, feel free to email us at the letter S podcast @gmail.com. And as always, stay in touch.